afternoon, everyone. You never know where we're going to be. That's Blaine Bartlett, BlaineBartlett.com. And I, David Meltzer, David at dmeltzer.com. And I'm here in Nashville with this beautiful lit picture behind me. And I'm at the Harpeth Hotel here in Franklin, Tennessee. We're going to do a meetup, Blaine. Right after this, it's 5 p.m. right now, Central Time. And at 6 p.m., I'll be downstairs meeting and learning a lesson you taught me. And the reason I do meetups, by the way, is I thought it was to answer questions and introduce people, but it ended up, Blaine said, what a great way to learn what people are listening for. And meetups to me are a great way to learn what people are listening for, which is added to the power of the content that we create, because understanding what people are listening for sure beats talking to people. And there's enough of that on Instagram and other places, people talking to you. Why not figure out what people are listening for and do the research and maybe come up with a conversation, collaboration, and coordination on how we could be of service or value to each other. Speaking of that, not only is Blaine Bartlett of service and value to so many, but so is Tracy Lawrence. And she's the founder of the Lawrence Advisory. And she is helping so many people in the collaboration and coordination portion of the C-Suite. And understanding how our careers transform and transition. Welcome to Office Hours, Tracy.
Thank you, David. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited because there is so much going on in the workplace. And it's not just COVID and the hybrid workspace and the remote workspace and the remote executives, but there's some significant changes in technology beyond the remote leadership. And it's really, I think, changing leadership and the focus of leaders in what we're trying to do. How have you, as one of the world's best advisors in this space, seen the leadership role change, not just because of remote and hybrid types of workplaces, but because of the speed in which technology creates change within our workplace culture?
Well, it's a great question. And again, I'm very happy to be here speaking with you both. Yeah, the demands of senior leaders today are dramatically different from what they were when I was coming up as a leader. And it's the pace of technology. It's really the pace of change in general, because it's definitely technology. It's the products that you're trying to deliver. It's, how your consumers or your audiences find out about you and what they know about you, and the fact that they can find things out instantaneously, right? It's the fact, so that redefines even the concept of who your stakeholders are. So it's the stock market, it's someone that's going to go buy your product, it's the people you work with, and there's this mechanism now that they can all communicate with each other immediately in real time. So right, so what it means to be a senior leader is really different from even 10 years ago, so much more complicated. But I also think that a lot of it still does come down to having a sense of purpose and knowing how to deal with people, understanding the people issues that you're faced with.
I love that you landed on that piece of it, Tracy. I've been working in leadership development for 40 plus years now, and have led some of the largest organizations through change processes. And one of the things that I discovered pretty early on was the difficulty with change for leaders and for the people impacted by the change wasn't necessarily the change itself. And I've done a lot of SAP rollouts, and I mean, just all kinds of stuff that are very complex. The disruption that change causes to relationships is the issue, not the change itself. And to your point, the landscape has changed dramatically for leaders. And if they're not paying attention, if we don't teach them, and if they aren't schooled in paying attention to the relational dynamic that is being disrupted, I don't care how intense your business model is or how clear you are about the business case for the change, it ain't going to happen.
So true.
So how do you go about working with the folks that you do? And I know that you've got something that we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit about the advisory work that you do. But how do you actually work with leaders to get them to appreciate, first of all, the need for paying attention to relationship, and then develop the skills that they actually need to have in order to functionally work with relationships?
So a lot of times the time that I'm brought in is when either something dramatic is changing, growth. A lot of times it's working with companies that are scaling. So now you're 3 times as big as you were a couple of years ago, or something's gone wrong. And, we all know the time that we learn the most is when we make mistakes and something goes wrong. And that's an incredible period of growth. So that's exciting, but it can also be really scary. But in either of those instances, people tend to be pretty open, right? To understanding that maybe they don't know everything. And I think that what my firm does uniquely is, we're big on diversity and diversity of thought, right? Diversity. I think because of my background, I have the ability to communicate with people from a lot of different backgrounds and to speak with people and allow them to understand that everyone's not like them. So a senior leader, sometimes what gets you to a big job is those relationships that you've been able to form with, powerful people. But once you're running a big company, you have to be able to communicate with all different kinds of people.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of what my firm brings to the table, is really bridging those gaps, being able to speak to a senior leader, but also being able to understand the culture of those beneath them who may not be so senior, but might influence what they're able to do.
And your firm is well known for the hiring, coaching, building high performing teams. But it's interesting today because I can't remember in such a short amount of time where there was so much demand, companies hiring 30,000 new employees, people, in a transformative state, executives, managers, directors, employees, everybody looking, from the great resignation to, I think it was a poll this year, over 53% of the people in America want to be entrepreneurs. They want to start their own business.
Mhm.
Well, what has occurred in it just a short amount of time, and I was wondering, where you sit and how you're consulting what I see a critical business issue, especially for larger companies, where they may have hired 30,000 people in the last 18 months, and now they had to lay off 12,000 people, not necessarily those 30,000 either, but someone who has not as long as Blaine. I only keep Blaine here so I feel young. With my 30 years, with my 30 years of experience, I started racking my brain going, gosh, if I was the CEO of my old company and I just had hired 30,000 people over the last 18 months, which is quite a taking, and then right around the corner laid off 12,000 or 18,000 of the 30,000, I'm still net way ahead of where I was 2.5, 3 years ago. But
Yeah.
I must have a cultural smorgasbord of problems
Yeah.
because I couldn't even handle it. What are you doing to help those companies who hired so many and now are laying them off?
What's interesting about that is it's still hard to, even with all the layoffs, it's still hard to find good people. And it's still the market is still in the hands of the candidate as opposed to the company. So a lot of the interactions that we have with people, with clients, is trying to get them to understand that the days where you could sit back and say, oh, we're going to look at the top 5 people and we'll put them through their paces and pick the best one, those people are gone by the time you're ready to make a hire. So it's really more, the recruiting process now is more find someone you have a match with and move fast. You still have to move pretty quickly. And you're right, like what we see is a lot of times the people that they've hired to scale up may be a different group of people from the ones that they had to let go. So you don't necessarily, from my perspective at least, see as much of a connection between the two in the work that we're doing. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah, but it does, I think, raise an interesting question. And Amazon comes to mind. I'm up in Seattle. I mean, you mentioned 30,000. They were on a huge hiring push within the last 18 months. And I think they have actually announced, there's about 12 to 15,000 that are going to be exiting. Culturally, you've got kind of a whipsaw that occurs. You're onboarding 30,000 people, which didn't happen overnight, certainly. So there's still that process going on as you're outsourcing, or not outsourcing, but downsizing, to the tune of about 12 to 14,000. So internally, that cultural dynamic in the organization, and here I go back to the nature of relationship. What would Lawrence Advisory be doing to talk to a senior leader, just to acknowledge, number one, that there may be an underground issue that they're not aware of, and possibly what could they do to mitigate it?
It's such a good point. And what we see in the last couple of years, especially, is a level of stress that senior leaders are faced is I've never seen it so high, right? Because first of all, there's a lot of pressure on you. If you're running a large group, let's say you're running a division in a company and there are changes, maybe they lay people off. You can't necessarily tell your employees that the changes are done.
Yeah.
So they look to you for reassurance, and you may or may not be able to give them that reassurance. So a lot of the conversations that we're having with clients right now are about managing change and managing a situation where you don't know when that change is going to end. So it is a really unique, and when you're talking about people who really mean well and care about the people who report to them, and they're doing the best they can. And I always tell people, give them any kind of stability you can provide it, but you have to be very honest with people too.
Yeah, because trust is really in play.
Yeah, I think transparency on every level, which causes this new equity and inclusion. A transparency at every level is needed and is accessed. So whether it's the public's transparency and the internal transparency, but that transparency, we still have to sift out our values and congruence with it. Just real quick, because I got a couple minutes before Mike comes on. What's amazing is that I feel, maybe I'm wrong, that jobs are so much easier today. That the amount of productivity that we can get done in a short amount of time from our houses or from Tulum, or believe it or not, Blaine and I are on the board of a charity, and I didn't feel guilty walking with zebras and giraffes out in the Maasai, and I had better self-service than I do in Orange County, California, and taking my coaching calls, in the middle of Kenya. But I think that we have settled in engagement and productivity because people are so productive. And I don't think leaders have a real good idea of how much effort their employees are giving because they're so darn productive with all the tools that we're given today. And, I'm looking at production in the sense of, I used to carry a roll of quarters around as a sales rep. How could I be as productive with a roll of quarters in the middle of Indiana that someone with all the technology that they have today with hotspots and calls and, holy moly. Do you see, because you're in so many great places, don't you see we could double our GMP if we just really focus in on true engagement and productivity of what our employees are actually doing during the day?
Could we double our? Well, maybe. One of the things I see is, I don't know, people just kind of adjust to that new pace. So the demands just, you can do that. You can do 2-3 times as much. I don't know. I've ended up this past year, I do coaching, and sometimes I end up with people who are just like so fried at the end because the demands, and those 12,000 people that they just let go. Now we're expecting you to pick up some of that. So I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on.
That's a good point, right? Like, we just need less people, and we're forcing productivity engagement through assignment. That's interesting. Yeah. But I do. Blaine, what was the poll of engagement on average? People are, what was the percentages?
It averages around 87% disengaged worldwide. That's Gallup's studies or polling data, and that's about 25 years worth of consistent reporting. It varies about 3 to 4 percentage points, but it's right around 87% disengaged.
Yeah, which is why, like, I think charitable endeavors, for our company, when you spend 10% of our engagement on charity, it allows them to feel that engagement, that self-empowered engagement, and it carries over into being engaged in the activities they get paid for as well. It's one of the secret sauces. But Tracy, we have so much more to talk about. We love your expertise, the Lawrence Advisory. Talk about a strong ROI, bringing in an advisor at the C-suite, especially to create a culture that creates a lot of money to help a lot of people and have a lot of fun. And we need more Tracy Lawrences out there and more of the Lawrence Advisory. So come back and join us. And we have many more questions if you haven't figured it out already. So thanks for handling the ones we gave you today.
Absolutely. Thanks to you both. Great to speak with you. Bye-bye.
Great job. Thank you. So fascinating and powerful. Thanks for joining us. All right. Mike was waiting in the wings patiently.
Yeah.
He's an entrepreneur like you and I, Blaine, except for he's also an author like you and I, and also a university professor. And Dr. Mike Lauser, welcome to Office Hours.
Thank you. Happy to be here. It's great to be with you today.
Well, I'm glad to see you here, Mike, for a very specific reason, and that it just kind of became obvious to me at the conclusion of our last conversation. Yeah, the hiring and termination of people in the workforce begs a conversation around civility.
Yes.
And David, I know that's kind of where your opening remarks were going to go. So I just wanted to jump in there. And I'm very interested to hear how you're actually positioning this, Mike.
Okay, great. So I've spent my entire career trying to figure out how to build great organizations, organizations that are effective in creating great products and services, that are efficient in using resources. But probably most important, they're just great places for people to work. The satisfaction is so high that people will want to work there whether they have to or not. So that's been a real challenge, and I've done it as an entrepreneur and a CEO and a professor and consultant. And so that's been my focus the last few years, is how do we create that culture of civility where people really enjoy being together and they like coming to work and they're effective. You've probably seen some of the studies that the typical CEO will spend about 7 weeks dealing with relational problems and drama at work, of people that just can't work together and can't perform their jobs well. And so that's been the focus of my research for the last few years and the new book that I have out.
Yeah, I want to talk about that new book, but I do, that's why I had so many children, so I could learn how to deal with so many employees and make that efficient, of course. But more importantly, as you bring civility back into the workplace and into all organizations, your book is so aligned with my mission in life, which is to empower over 1 billion people to be happy. The idea of oneness, one people, one planet, but you utilize 6 universal truths for being happy with each other or together. And in one people, one planet, those 6 universal truths, I think, can be utilized to help all of us as daily practices. I was hoping that you could share all, if not a few, of the universal truths and, how important and powerful and empowering these universal truths are in the mission of creating happiness.
Great. So the sources that I used to discover these 6 universal truths were the ancient texts of the religious founders, the world religious founders, the writings of the great philosophers for thousands of years, and then more recently, looking at 20 years of research in positive psychology to see if those principles have been vetted as actually working and producing the desired results, which is a happier frame of mind, a better physical health as well. And so the first one that we looked at is this idea of giving up the ego. And we think of the ego as, something that says we're better than other people, that we're kind of proud and kind of cocky. But the way it's been defined in the historical literature is the ego is a composite of all of our self-perceptions. And the ancient Hindu and Buddhist philosophers said that it's a fabrication, it's an illusion. So all these perceptions we have of self have come from feedback we've gotten from parents and teachers and peers and the media and so on, and they set bounds and limitations on what we do. So the first thing is we've got to really look at our self-perceptions, where they come from, and which ones are limiting our ability to grow and develop and be more successful in our careers and in our lives. The second one is to refrain from judging others. We develop perceptions of other people in the exact same way we develop perceptions of ourselves. We see very superficial cues, maybe color, race, religion, political party, and then we fill in all the missing pieces and construct a personality for people and tend to put them in categories or groups. The problem with that in the workplace is we're ineffective in our interaction, our dialogue. We don't even want to interact with those people. And if we can lose those implicit biases and see that, we're all works in progress, and that there's a complex individual there that can teach us something, that everyone has value, we develop better relationships, more friendships, and more happiness at work. The third one's probably the most powerful one for impacting real change today, and that's simply doing good deeds daily, making a difference today. There is so much research that if people get up and rather than thinking about ourselves, looking in the mirror, me, do I look okay? Is my hair combed okay? Do I have the right clothes on? What are people going to think of me? You say, I'm going to go out and see if I can contribute value to someone else's life. And you look for opportunities to do good deeds and random acts of kindness. It can be shoveling someone's walks. It can be carrying someone's grocery. It can be paying the toll of the car behind you at a toll booth, giving up a seat on the bus, just smiling and calling an old friend or a family member. And the research shows that getting off ourselves and onto others does produce actual chemical reactions in our brain, which affects our physiology as well. So those are the first three. You want to talk a little more about those three, or
they can buy the book. They can buy the book to get the other three as well, and because they're also very, very good. And I know Blaine is pressing with our last question here. So, what do you got, Blaine?
Well, I'm just I'm struck by the 7 Habits of Successful People. There's a lot of wisdom there. Carlos Hunte's The Alchemist. There's things that speak to that, and you bring in these ancient texts, these ancient teachings, and I'm just being very interested from your perspective in the work you've done in organizations. These seem to be very simple, and they are very simple. And it's my experience that simple things oftentimes don't get attended to in the way that they could legitimately be attended to, because people will tend to dismiss them as something that, if it's not a big challenge to do it, what's the ROI on this? So how are you working with people to do these simple acts? And they are actually relatively simple acts prima facie. I mean, if you just look at them. Now, letting go of the ego is not so easy. I understand that one. But the other two that you had spoken about, not being judgmental, acts of kindness. How do you work with that in an organizational sense? And I've got the idea of civility, as being the litmus test here.
Yeah. So great question. I'm glad you asked that. The other ones are real simple too. It's just not holding grudges, forgiving, sharing our resources, and so on. And these are not new principles. We've known these for years. The problem is we don't practice them. Yeah. And the ancient religious founders, the philosophers, always just said, hey, just try it and see what happens. And they were always encouraging people to try these practices. And so that's what we're doing. We have a MBA course in civility. We have an undergraduate course in happiness at work and in your career. We have a corporate training program. And what we try to do is get people to understand the concepts and then actually practice them and see what happens. So we have a journal. We would encourage them, for example, give up the ego, to work on a limiting self-perception and set small goals to prove that they can change that perception of themselves. And right now I have a whole group of leaders doing 3 good deeds a day and journaling what's happening. And the feedback is amazing. I can't believe how happy I am today just because I thought more of other people than myself. And so our goal is, our mission, we're evangelists for happiness and civility. And our mission is to get people over a period of time to try these things, record how it affects their life. And then remember in the future, if they sink back into despair or incivility, they'll remember, oh, I quit doing those things that when I did them, it did change my countenance. So it's more of an invitation to actually practice systematically some of these concepts over a period of time. And the results are just amazing. We work with some incredible entrepreneurs and CEOs and companies that have built really, really more positive cultures when they focus on the whole person and say, rather than just have you bring your siloed skills, just come and bring your work skills and go home. Come to work and let's work together to have great interaction and to give everyone opportunities for growth and to learn how to work more effectively together and to improve our countenance in the workplace. And it's a win-win situation for everyone that works there. The research shows that when you create one of these warm cultures where happiness is more prevalent, the outcomes are just amazing. There's a study done by the American Psychiatric Association in 17 industries, and people like going to work more. They're liked better. They have better interaction, better team interaction. They're more likely to stay. They're more likely to tell their friends to apply for jobs. Performance is up to 30% higher. So the outcomes of creating a really warm culture where we're focusing on whole individuals and their well-being at work has huge payoffs for everyone.
Yeah, well, it's so nice to know people like you as executive director of the Center of Entrepreneurship there at Utah State, because there's so many people, it's still as if the branding of an entrepreneur is not to go to college and to not understand the happiness side. It's more than just the grind, dropping out of high school and grinding your way through life. And, I certainly would love to stop by, and if Blaine's around someday, especially to speak at that happiness class and teach people how you can create abundance, make a lot of money by helping a lot of people and having a lot of fun in the activity you get paid for. And this book is a key guide with the universal truths, as you know, have been from Lao Tzu to Course in Miracles to Napoleon Hill, all over the place, Compassionate Capitalism, all the books out there, just aggregated into these simple truths. And one thing that came to mind, Mike, before I let you go, and we'll bring David on, it's so funny as you state the simple universal truths. My favorite quote for the last couple of weeks is, if it's simple to do, unfortunately, it's simple not to do. And I think that these students really, the journaling and the minimum requirements of lowering the bar are a great way of getting people into the disciplines and habits of progress and good behavior of helping other people and creating abundance. And bravo to you. I'd love to have you back. I'd love to stop by the school sometime as well, especially that happiness course, because I'd love to be able to see what that's like and speak to those students.
That'd be awesome. We'd love to have you. And thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Congrats. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Our cleanup hitter for the day, Double D himself.
Hey.
Another David. Don't feel left out. Blaine has 2 B's. We got 2 D's, and I'm sitting between. But this is a old friend and associate of mine, someone who's dedicated his life to probably the most important activity of life. It's the great creator of ignorant arrogance. And when I say that, I'm talking about parents. David Lucas is here, executive director of Parents USA. And I say parents are the most ignorant, arrogant people we know. The most obvious ignorant, arrogant people are the people that attack us all the time, that don't like us. But what I think is more deceptive and more dangerous are parents, because they love us so much that they're more afraid for us than they are for themselves. And they continually use arrogance that they pretend to know what's best for us because they love us so much and they're so afraid of us getting hurt. They give us bad advice. And so we need some great advisors and mentorship and laws and regulations in order to not only protect us from the ignorant, arrogant people that do hurt, but even from the ignorant arrogance of parents who love us too much. And I think one of the things I love about the Parents USA is it's a support network that rises up to the challenge to protect the most important part about being a parent, which is the child itself. So David, welcome again. Give me a little bit of background on some of the injustices right now with the parent-child relationship and some of the things, because you tell me all these stories and I'm sitting there going, does that really happen? Holy moly. I had no idea.
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate your inviting me on. Blaine, glad you're here. I think one of the problematic facets of our society is we're built on the Constitution, the concepts of freedom and liberty, and then we turn to government and say, but we would like, some things handled by government, and certainly let's protect those who need to be protected. And when you bring up the idea of protecting kids, everybody's on board with that. The issue is, how far do we go with this? We're going to protect, and who's doing that protecting? As you say, there are these stories, and the question is, does this really happen? The answer is yes. Within the last couple of days, I became aware of a case in Connecticut where parents rewarding their kids, giving them some money and saying, yes, you can walk up to the nearby Dunkin' Donuts, get your favorite treat, and walk home. But then there were a flurry of phone calls, apparently, to 911. Oh my gosh, there are kids out there. And as we've discussed off air many a time, we're never going to stop people from calling 911 and reporting something. I mean, historically, people call 911 when their pizza doesn't arrive on time. The question is, should government respond? And I think in many cases, government realizes, no, we don't respond to the call because your pizza didn't arrive. And I have recommended, and I want, through our work and through the work of others, perhaps in collaboration, to cause a triage by 911, and for all those who are there to protect us, law enforcement, EMTs and the like, it's what's your emergency? Well, there's a child out here by himself. People have called because there's a kid at a park by themselves, and they're concerned about the child. So your concern doesn't equal that I, as a parent, am criminally negligent or am deserving of CPS resources being utilized to investigate my family because I made that decision. But this happens all the time. So again, triage. What's your emergency? Kid alone. Great. Are they hurt? Do we need to send an EMT? No, they don't appear to be hurt. Do they appear to be in distress? Are they crying? Are they holding their arm? Are they looking about? Are they curled up in the fetal position? No, they're just playing on the monkey bars, if we can still use that term, monkey bars. And then the next question, are they in imminent danger from some identifiable risk? A swimming pool, a construction site, oncoming traffic? Well, no, but something could happen. The speculation that something could happen to a child leads to really bad outcomes because, sure, things can happen, but they really don't, statistically speaking. So where we come in and what we'd like to do is have people understand what our rights are and what our rights aren't. And therefore, for law enforcement, for judges, for prosecutors to get it. And I can carry it over to the school systems. And it's real simple. And this goes back to constitutional law. Everybody in America should know this part. And I don't pretend to be a con law professor. I am a con law person. I'm an attorney, been in practice for, gee whiz, I hate to disclose how many decades I've been in practice. But here's the bottom line. Government can infringe on our fundamental constitutional rights if there is a compelling, legitimate government interest. Protecting others from harm is one of those interests. And in doing so, government must only infringe on our rights in the most narrow means necessary to accomplish the legitimate interest. So it's kind of all right, we can do it. We need to intervene. But just because you're allowed to intervene doesn't mean you take over and you take the child away from the parents, or you arrest parents because they had the gall to have a 12 or 14-year-old care for the other siblings, or they let their kid walk to the Dunkin' Donuts. Many of these things end up being where the police officer arrests the parent because the parent won't agree with the police officer's subjective opinion that the child shouldn't be allowed to walk, play, go where they're going, and things like that. So it really is, and incidentally, I've been advising legislators around the country because, you're probably all aware, there's a flurry of legislation, especially from those on the conservative side, of we don't want schools doing this or that. And I'm thinking, yeah, but why pick out one thing? How about let's talk about everything? Don't lie to parents ever. If your child is not doing well in school academically, parents have a right to know. If your child was in a fight at school, parents have a right to know. If your child's caught doing drugs, dealing drugs at school, the parents have a right to know. If the child wants to be called by a different pronoun, the parents have a right to know. All of these things are in the same umbrella. Don't pull one out and isolate it and say, well, this is particularly necessary. And then the idea is, but children need to be protected from parents who won't be supportive. Well, you know, if I did drugs at school and the school called my parents would be very upset about that. I might need protection, but if so, it's not the school's decision to say, let's not tell David's parents he was doing drugs at school. They might give him a whooping. Instead, let's tell the parents, but if we're concerned about the ramifications, let's call Child Protective Services or law enforcement. That's their job, not my job. And so I would like to see some more lines drawn about whose job it is to protect kids, because we always, Parents USA is on board with let's protect kids, but let's do so judiciously, understanding parents have the right to make decisions about, I mean, gee whiz, I think we're going to get to the point where if you allow your child to play tackle football, somebody else is going to claim you're exposing your child to undue risk of harm, and therefore you're a negligent parent subjecting them to arrest or CPS investigation. I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but all things considered, there are parents who say, my child will never play tackle football. And those are the parents who will therefore observe another child playing tackle football and go, oh my gosh, how reckless of his parents or her parents to let them play tackle football. You see where I'm going?
Oh,
yeah. Slippery slope.
I got grandparents, aunts, and uncles that are not happy with my tackle football decisions. And
yeah.
I appreciate that, but I do, as a parent, want to be able to make a decision based off of my knowledge of football. And, you know, you're looking at someone that spent a lot of money to get baseline testing for my son if he's going to play. And
excellent idea, by the way.
And do that, because no matter what sport he's playing, you know, I want to know if, you know, he needs to rest because his brain was jiggled or hit, which happens. You know, I love those parents. We have, and I hate to tell this story, but it's so funny. We have parents on the street that do look down on me because my 12-year-old son plays tackle football. And, you know, I've been around at the highest level this game, and I have people around me at the highest level protecting my son in the game. But meanwhile, their kid's driving an e-bike with no helmet up and down the street
right.
at dusk with my daughter driving. I don't care if you're completely padded up. My daughter's driving down the street. You better keep your kid off the street. And I love my child, but I'm just warning them. But it's so funny because these lines are hard to see and hard to find. And we need to protect everyone and be as fair as we can. And it does take some serious scenario thinking. Blaine, you look perplexed as well. You are the most experienced parent here. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm going back to my childhood in part here, David, both Davids. I mean, Mom, you know, and it was Mom. She would cut us loose, particularly during the summertime. And we'd leave the house around 7 a.m., come back around 6 when I heard her voice calling, saying dinner's ready.
Yeah.
And you know, and we would just roam. There was no adult supervision. And you know, part of what went on was there was an installation that occurred as we were growing up around responsibility. So, you know, the idea that, you know, I would take care of my little brother. I would make sure that I'd look out for him. He'd tag along, and it was kind of he was a couple of years younger, but I'd look. All of that stuff kind of got built in, and we didn't have a nanny state that usurped, and I mean usurped, the responsibility of the parent at that point in time. So, I'm struck by the fear that speaks to the creation of some of the stuff that you're actually identifying here. Statistically speaking, you know, we live in probably the safest time in human history. All of the drama on the news, if it bleeds, it leads, you know, that sort of a thing. So what we see on TV is not representative of the vast majority of what people are exposed to and actually living in. I mean, that's statistically accurate as an assessment. So in the work that you do here, David, I'm just here. How are you addressing in this advocacy group, the Parent USA, how are you addressing people's ability to identify what's truly dangerous as opposed to the hypothetical danger, and I mean hypothetical danger that everybody succumbs to?
Quite often people get in a question and say, hey, that's an excellent question. And I think, yeah, everybody says that. Oh, but let me tell you, Blaine, that's a great question you just asked. And let me break it down. First of all, we get requests for help all the time, or we read about something in the news. We get in touch with the parents and say, we'll provide pro bono legal services in your situation, because there's no factual dispute about what happened. The only question is, did you commit a crime, or did you do something neglectful to the point where CPS investigation is appropriate? And we push back. The real question, though, is if you've done nothing wrong, why should you have to be involved in the system? Again, think about it. You're just walking down the street and somebody arrests you and says, you've been identified as somebody who committed a crime, and you're thinking, I'm innocent. You shouldn't have to go through the process. We should have a better screening process, if you will, so that we don't just throw the net around everybody. But so the starting point is we push back in individual cases. Secondly, we're trying to get legislation enacted or legislation revised, edited appropriately. And then I came up with a new one, and now I'm wanting every state in the union to have this one. And to those of you who know anything about appellate court decisions, anytime there's an appellate court decision that modifies or holds that a particular criminal statute in particular remains constitutional if interpreted in a certain way. This is the court's way of saying, well, we don't want to strike it down as unconstitutional. So we're going to hold that if it's applied in a certain way, it remains valid. Well, that opinion needs to be collected week in, week out, passed over to the legislature, who then are required to modify the statute to fit what the appellate court has just decided. And then let's make sure every prosecutor in that state and every law enforcement officer in that state knows the law is now different. You can't enforce what you used to think was the law. And incidentally, that's because one of the cases that we have, a woman in 2020 got arrested. Incidentally, it's still pending. We're still waiting for the judge to rule on our motion to kick that criminal charge out. She got arrested when she went to work, and her 14-year-old took care of the younger kids. Everybody was home during the pandemic. She got arrested and charged under reckless conduct in Georgia, a statute that in 1997, the Supreme Court of Georgia held unconstitutional as applied to a parent who allowed her 12-year-old to take care of a 5-year-old. And in that particular case, the 5-year-old died. Tragic though it was, the Supreme Court said, but it's not a crime what the mother did to entrust the 12-year-old. You don't make it a crime just because of the outcome, what she did. So here we have in 2020, a mom getting arrested. In 2021, she was indicted on the charges. It's 2023, and the judge still hasn't ruled on our motion. And yet this is how the system works. And think about it. This shouldn't be what parents have to go through. Right. We need to educate the legislatures and the courts and law enforcement so that let's take these. By the way, the other part is these resources are being wasted instead of being applied to the kids who have broken bones and cigarette burns and drug using parents who are not allowing them to even have nutrition and hygiene and such. That's where our resources need to be devoted. All of this is just a waste. And hey, by the way, it's a violation of the constitutional rights of these parents. So yeah, we're trying to grow the organization. We want to be the big bad boys on the block like the AARP is, with hundreds of millions or tens of millions of parents saying, hey, we can't do this day to day. We have our jobs and our responsibilities. We'll turn this work over to Parents USA. So I appreciate the invite on today, Dave.
Of course, you got to rub it in now that I'm 55. You got to bring up AARP, but I'm still a parent, and we do need people to give us clarification and protection. And thank you, David, for all the work that you do. Everybody, go to parentsusa.org. Let's support the rights of parents that are protecting their children to be protected as well. Executive Director of Parents USA, David DeLucas. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Terrific. Thank you.
Keep up the great work,
David. Will do.
Finally, someone using their law degree in a great way to help people. I love it. All right, real quickly, Blaine, because I got to meet up in 15 minutes in the lobby.
I know you do. Tell everybody hi.
What's your takeaway, my brother?
I'm going to steal a little one-liner from Mike. Evangelist for happiness. That's what I'm taking out of here. Whether it's through the employment process, how do you bring people in, and also how do you let people go? Happiness is built in as a natural state of who we are as a human being. It's kind of our birthright, and it gets corrupted. Take that all the way down to what David was just talking about around some of the stuff that parents deal with. I roamed I roamed the forest. I was happy as a clam, and my mom was happy that I was out of the house.
Yeah.
But the idea of happiness, and you spend a lot of time with this, just in the work that you do. Evangelist for happiness. There's a lot of domains that we can play that song in, and that's what I'm working with today. So
I love it.
Great guess.
My takeaway, I think it was aligned with all three, and it's to be careful that the pendulum always is going to swing too far one way, and we need people like Tracy to protect us as C-level executives. As things swing too far one way, we've overhired or underhired, or certain things that need to be protected in the workforce that swing one way or another. Obviously, with Mike as well, in his 6 universal truths, those 6 truths tend to lead us to that pendulum swing once again. And obviously, obsequious in its nature with David DeLucas, no doubt that our legislation tends to push the pendulum. Who's going to be there to make sure it's swinging back to fairness? Because if we move one way or another, that democracy that we've created that's so powerful certainly can become fascism, or even worse when we allow the pendulum to swing too far. Blaine Bartlett, always pouring into the community, compassionate capitalist, the originator, the OG of compassionate capitalism and of happiness, the evangelist of happiness, Dave Meltzer, here with the incredible Blaine Bartlett, blainebartlett.com. Check him out. He has a great mastermind as well. And anywhere, just find him there at that domain. He's here helping the biggest companies in the world and the smallest entrepreneurs like me. Thanks so much, Blaine. We'll see you soon.
Hey, buddy. Have a great meetup.
I will. Thank you for joining me. All right, everyone. We're meeting up in about 11 minutes. So if you're close to Franklin, Tennessee, swing by the Harpeth Hotel here, david@dmeltzer.com. If you want to come to free Friday training tomorrow at 7 a.m. Pacific time, we will be training an incredible training about progress. So how do we have behavior that aggregates, accelerates, and compounds good progress in our lives? Remember, most importantly, be more interested than interesting. Be kind to your future self. Like my friends here today, do good deeds. I'll see you later. Thanks.